The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Maple Street Cafe as Richard Westbrook pushed through the glass door, shaking droplets from his expensive coat. At 62, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had built an empire from nothing, but today, something felt different. Today, 23 years after the worst day of his life, he had chosen to visit this modest cafe instead of his usual five-star establishments. The morning had started like any other. Board meetings, conference calls, decisions worth millions of dollars. But as he sat in his corner office overlooking the city, a profound loneliness had settled over him. The penthouse apartment, the luxury cars, the private jets, none of it filled the void that had existed in his heart since that terrible night in 1999 when his world collapsed. He had been driving home from a business trip, eager to see his 5-year-old daughter Emma after 3 days away. His wife Sarah was in the passenger seat, chatting excitedly about Emma's upcoming ballet recital. Little Emma was in her car seat, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit, Mr. Hoppy, her bright green eyes sparkling with joy as she told him about the picture she had drawn for him at school. That's when the drunk driver ran the red light. The impact was devastating. Sarah died instantly. Richard survived with broken ribs and a shattered heart. But Emma, sweet, innocent Emma, was thrown from the wreckage. Her body was never found despite weeks of searching. The police presumed she had been swept away by the river that ran alongside the highway. After months of investigation, she was declared dead. 23 years later, Richard still woke up some nights calling her name. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story that will restore your faith in destiny, please take a moment to comment below and let me know where you're watching from around the world. And if this story touches your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more amazing true stories that remind us miracles can happen when we least expect them. Inside the cafe, the warm aroma of coffee and fresh-baked pastries created a comforting atmosphere that Richard rarely experienced in his corporate world. He chose a corner table, preferring to observe rather than be observed. The lunch crowd was typical for a Tuesday afternoon, office workers grabbing quick meals, elderly couples sharing quiet conversations, young mothers with strollers navigating between tables. That's when he saw her. A young woman, probably in her late 20s, moved gracefully between the tables with a natural warmth that drew smiles from every customer she served. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the cafe's standard uniform, a green apron over a white blouse. But it wasn't her appearance that made Richard's breath catch in his throat. It was the way she moved. The slight tilt of her head when she listened to customers. The way she unconsciously tucked a strand of hair behind her left ear. The bright, genuine smile that lit up her entire face. She reminded him of someone. Someone he had loved more than life itself. "Good afternoon, sir. What can I get started for you today?" Her voice was melodic, kind, with just a hint of nervousness as she approached his table. Richard looked up into eyes that were unmistakably familiar, the same shade of green that had haunted his dreams for over 2 decades. But it was when she leaned slightly forward to straighten the salt and pepper shakers that his world tilted off its axis. There, on the left side of her neck, partially hidden by her collar, was a small birthmark. Not just any birthmark, but a distinctive crescent-shaped mark that looked exactly like a tiny moon. Richard's hands began to tremble. His coffee cup rattled against its saucer. The birthmark was identical, absolutely identical, to the one his daughter Emma had carried. He had kissed that little mark goodnight 1,000 times, had told her it was where an angel had touched her before she was born. "Sir, are you all right?" The young woman's voice was filled with genuine concern as she noticed his distress. Richard struggled to find his voice. When he finally spoke, the words came out as barely more than a whisper. "Hey lady, my daughter had the same birthmark." The waitress, her name tag read Grace, instinctively touched her neck, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "Oh, this old thing. I've had it since I was born. My mom always said it made me special." "Your mom?" Richard's heart was pounding so hard he was sure everyone in the cafe could hear it. "My adoptive mom," Grace clarified, and Richard felt the world spin around him. "I was adopted when I was very young. The Hendersons are wonderful people, but they never knew much about my biological family." Richard's mind raced. The timeline fit. The age was right. The birthmark was impossible to ignore. But how could he even begin to ask the questions that were burning in his chest? "I'm sorry," he said, trying to compose himself. "It's just, The resemblance is remarkable. My daughter. She would be about your age now. Grace sat down across from him, her shift manager's disapproving glance going unnoticed. Something in this man's eyes spoke to her soul. Would be. We lost her in an accident when she was 5. A car crash. Her body was never recovered. The words still tasted like ashes in his mouth after all these years. Grace's hand instinctively went to her neck again, her fingers tracing the familiar crescent shape. I'm so sorry for your loss. I can't imagine. Can I ask you something? Richard's voice was gentle but urgent. Do you remember anything from before you were adopted? Anything at all? Grace frowned, her brow furrowing in concentration. Not much. I was in foster care for a while before the Hendersons found me. I was probably around 6 or 7. I had some injuries, a head injury that affected my memory. The doctors said it wasn't uncommon for trauma to cause memory loss in young children. Richard's heart was racing now. Head injuries. Memory loss. The right age. The birthmark. The resemblance. It was too much to be coincidence. Grace, he said softly, this might sound crazy, but would you be willing to take a DNA test? Grace stared at him for a long moment. In her 28 years, she had always felt like something was missing. The Hendersons had given her a loving home, but she had always wondered about her origins, about the dreams she sometimes had of a man with kind eyes reading her bedtime stories, of a woman with gentle hands braiding her hair. You really think? She whispered. I don't know, Richard admitted. But that birthmark, your mannerisms, your eyes. Grace, you have your mother's eyes. Tears began to form in Grace's eyes. What was her name? Your daughter. Emma. Emma Rose Westbrook. She loved ballet and chocolate ice cream and a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Hoppy. She was the light of my life. Grace's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening in shock. Mr. Hoppy, she whispered. What did you say? I have this old stuffed rabbit. I've had it since I was little. I never knew why, but I always called him Mr. Hoppy. The Hendersons said I had it with me when I first came to stay with them. Richard felt tears streaming down his face. Grace, I need to show you something. With shaking hands, he pulled out his phone and scrolled to a folder he had never been able to delete. Photos of Emma. His beautiful, precious Emma. He turned the screen toward Grace. The resemblance was undeniable. The same eyes, the same smile, the same stubborn cowlick that made her hair curl just slightly at the temples. Oh my God, Grace breathed, staring at the photos. She looks just like me when I was little. Grace, I think you are Emma. I think you're my daughter. The cafe seemed to fade away around them as Grace processed what he was saying. 28 years of questions, of feeling like she belonged somewhere else, of dreams she couldn't quite remember, it all began to make sense. But how? She asked through her tears. They told you I was dead. The river, Richard explained, his voice breaking. You were thrown from the car near the river. The current was strong that night because of heavy rains. The search teams looked for weeks, but they never found. We thought you had drowned. But I survived, Grace whispered, the pieces slowly fitting together. Someone must have found me downstream. With a head injury, no memory, no identification. You would have been in the system as a Jane Doe, a young child with trauma-induced amnesia. Richard reached across the table and gently took her hand. Grace, I never stopped looking for you. Even after the police gave up, I hired private investigators. I never stopped hoping. Grace looked down at their joined hands. His hands were older now, weathered by time and grief, but she could almost remember smaller versions of those same hands tucking her into bed, helping her tie her shoes, applauding at her dance recitals. I need to call my parents, she said suddenly. The Hendersons. They need to know. Of course, Richard said immediately. Grace, I want you to know, if you are Emma, if you are my daughter, I will never do anything to come between you and the people who raised you. They saved your life. They gave you love when I couldn't. They're your real family, too. Grace squeezed his hand. Can we do the test today? Within hours, they were at a medical facility, both of them nervous and hopeful and terrified all at once. The DNA test would take 48 hours to process, but Richard had paid for the fastest service available. As they waited outside the building, Grace turned to him. "What if it's not true? What if I'm not her?" Richard looked at this young woman who had brought more hope into his life in one afternoon than he had felt in 23 years. "Then I will have met someone extraordinary who reminded me that miracles are still possible. And I'll spend the rest of my life grateful for that gift. And if I am Emma, then I'll spend the rest of my life making up for all the birthdays I missed, all the bedtime stories I didn't get to read, all the times I couldn't be there to protect you." His voice broke. "And I'll spend every day thanking the Henderson family for being the parents you needed when I couldn't be." 48 hours later, Richard's phone rang. Grace was beside him in his office, both of them holding their breath. "Mr. Westbrook, this is Dr. Martinez from the lab. I have your results." "Yes." "It's a 99.7% match. She is definitely your biological daughter." The phone slipped from Richard's hand as Grace threw her arms around him, both of them sobbing with joy and disbelief and overwhelming relief. "Daddy," she whispered through her tears, the word feeling both foreign and perfectly natural on her lips. "My Emma," he whispered back, holding her like he would never let her go again. "My beautiful Emma. You came back to me." Later that evening, Richard sat in the Hendersons' modest living room, surrounded by photo albums chronicling Grace's childhood. Margaret Henderson, a kind woman in her 60s, wiped tears from her eyes as she showed him pictures of Grace's first day of school, her high school graduation, her wedding to her college sweetheart Tom. "She was such a sweet child," Margaret said. "Quiet at first, understandably. But she had this inner strength, this determination to make everyone around her happy. We knew she was special from the moment she came to us." "Thank you," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for loving her, for raising her to be such an incredible person. You gave her everything I couldn't." "She gave us everything too," Margaret's husband Bill added. "We never had children of our own. Grace was our miracle." Grace sat between her two fathers, the one who had given her life and the one who had saved it, feeling more complete than she ever had before. "I don't want anything to change," she said firmly. "I have two families now, and I love you all. Mr. Westbrook, Dad, I don't need your money or your company. I just need you to be my father." Richard smiled through his tears. "Then that's all I'll be. But Grace, I do want to help the Henderson family. They've given me the greatest gift in the world. I want to make sure they're comfortable, that they never have to worry about anything again." "We don't need anything," Bill started to protest. "Please," Richard interrupted gently. "Let me do this. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Because you saved my daughter's life, and now you've given her back to me." 6 months later, Grace stood in the same cafe where everything had changed, but now she was the owner. Richard had bought the building and given it to her as a wedding gift, though she insisted on running it exactly as it had been, a warm, welcoming place where people could find comfort and connection. The Hendersons had retired comfortably, spending their days spoiling their first grandchild, Grace's newborn son, Richard William, named for both his grandfathers. And Richard, for the first time in 23 years, he slept through the night without waking up calling Emma's name. Instead, he woke up grateful for second chances, for the power of a parent's love, and for the miracle of a small birthmark that had brought his daughter home. Sometimes, he reflected, the greatest treasures are found in the most ordinary places. A quiet cafe. A kind waitress. A crescent-shaped mark that proved love never truly dies, and families separated by tragedy can be reunited by hope. As he watched Grace serve coffee to her customers with that same bright smile that had captured his heart 28 years ago, he knew that some stories do have happy endings. Sometimes, the missing pieces of our lives find their way back to us when we need them most. This incredible story reminds us that miracles happen every day, in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes, a simple birthmark can change everything. Sometimes, love really does conquer all. If this story moved you like it moved me, please share it with others and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing true stories that prove miracles are real and love never gives up. Because sometimes, just sometimes, what we thought was lost forever finds its way back home.